Okay, so hopefully I got the lights set up a little better, because let's be honest, the last video I did looked like a dead person. But I kind of did a little bit more research on how this should be set up, so yeah, let me know. Okay, but today we're going to talk about everybody's favorite little series, the Fanshowdown. I think I got 4 more guys for us to look at and see if anybody can, I don't know, get a deal like like Thomas did. I mean, who knows? So let's just get right into it. This one right here is called the Golden Ratio, and it was made by Adam, and his inspiration said, well, he said it was the Golden Ratio. And this is another one of those fans that he said took him 30 minutes to design. And we all know what happens when somebody designs a fan in 30 minutes. They go pro. So this one might have an epic chance to be one of the better fans we've seen. And if you know anything about the Golden Ratio, that's what the design is. I think Nautilus shell. I guess if you don't know what it is, I'll put a video in the description from somebody that I watched that does a really good job describing it. But anyway, there it is, Golden Ratio. And he was hoping that the springy design, so if you kind of look at the hub here, it's kind of hard to see, but it just moves around. The fan blades, since they bend so much, kind of act like a shock absorber in a sense. And it gives it a little bit of movement. And his idea, he knew that was going to happen. His idea there was that little bit of movement might make the fan sound quieter. And when I ran the dB test, this one was actually quite quiet, and the sound was a nice low-pitched hum, and it was really almost not even noticeable. So you nailed the sound, the acoustics that you were going for. You nailed it. Then it was time to, you know, plug in the old fog machine and see how the flow worked on this guy, and nothing really dramatic. Everything flowed into the fan very well. Looked like it was maintaining a good static pressure, pulling the air in and pushing it out as you would expect it to, while doing it pretty quietly. So hopeful that this thing would actually perform pretty well on our radiator. Now you guys are going to be proud of me, because this time around, since it's becoming fall and I can keep the windows open and the heat out, I was able to keep the room temperatures a lot more stable than I normally can. And hopefully when I finally get to move down into the basement after the renovation is done, that won't be a problem anymore. But for now, everything was pretty stable. So for the Golden Ratio fan, the room temperature was 20.3 degrees, and it finished with an average of 82.2, giving us a delta of 61.9. Now, is that good? Well, if you remember any of the other videos, the past series, you know that that's not the best. But when it comes to these 4 fans, who knows? Now this next one though, this one actually is kind of cool, because if you watched my previous video, the one where I looked like a dead body, actually no, the one before that, where we ran the big giant fan that I basically had printed this large fan and I wanted to power it up, and during a printer review we did that and it exploded very awesomely. Oh my God. But the idea was, it was a model of the Rolls-Royce Trent series, and that's what this is. This is called the Major Trent. The designer's name is Leonardo, and his inspiration was obviously the Rolls-Royce, and he did a good job. Now he said that, you know, it's not perfect to the actual engine, but I get what he's going for, and I don't know why, but these big old spinners on the front, when you put that on a fan, it looks cool. Now I get why they don't do it for production fans, because you couldn't really go a pole configuration with a giant spinner on the front, but I don't know, I like it. It just adds an aesthetic that I find pleasing. However, noise-wise, it was pretty loud. It was literally, I mean, if he was going for the jet engine look, he also nailed the jet engine sound, because this thing racked up an amazing 45.7 dB. You wouldn't call it pleasing, to say the least. Now in the fog test though, did really well. The spinner kind of funneled air around the hub of the motor, pulled air in and pushed it out just as you expected. Nice close blades, many of them. So you're thinking that it's, you know, you would think that this would put out a nice bit of static pressure and do very well in the cooling test. Now the room temperature did bump up a little bit to 20.5, but our average temperature finished out at 81.7, giving us a delta of 61.2. So slightly better than the Golden Ratio, but still not the best when we think back to the other fans we've seen on this series. But looks-wise, I like it. I really like how it looks with this PLA, this nice, the nice blue sparkle. I like the big hub. I don't know why, but I do. And all in all, if I had to choose which one I wanted to run on my machine, I think I would take this one so far. Now these next two fans are going a little bit above and beyond. They not only wanted to make a fan, they wanted to make other components to go with it, which is kind of exciting, and it was fun for me to test out because I see where they're going. I see what they're going for. So this next fan is called the Ducted Fan, and right here it just looks like a regular three-blade fan. Three-blade fan. Not much to it. Pretty standard. Simple blades, simple hub. Not very many of them. But you also got this. Now the designer behind this one's name's Rob, and his idea or inspiration behind this was that he thinks there's a lot of performance left on the table because everybody's, you know, trying to design fans, but they're not really considering the flow of air into the fan. So he thinks that improving the case form will actually give him better performance. And that's what he did with this ring. So you might notice that it's a little rough, and that's because I tried to give it a little bit of a sanding to kind of smooth it out, because with the support material, it wasn't really liking to come off there. And I didn't want it to be super rough because that would kind of negate the whole reason for having it. So I smoothed it out a bit. It kind of ruined the aesthetics, but it did smooth it out a little bit. Noise-wise though, that's where it gets interesting. Three blades is going to be loud. It's going to have a choppy helicopter type sound, and that's what it sounded like. Now, surprisingly, the output, the sound output at the same distance as, like, say, the Major Trent, which was pretty loud, it was a little quieter at 44.6, but the Trent was a higher pitch sound, where this was a more low wop, 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 like a, I don't know, it literally sounds kind of like a regular fan. And I found it it was perceived to me, at least, to be louder, even though it actually shows a lower dBA. So that was weird. But the interesting part was when I hooked up the fog machine to see if this shroud was actually doing what he hoped it would. And, you know, when you stand back and you kick it on, it looks like it's doing a really good job of pulling air into the fan and pushing it through the radiator. But when you get real close up to the bottom and you just kind of look at the lip of this duct he made, it's working. So you can see that the smoke comes across the table, and then you can see it start whipping around the edge of the duct and picking up speed as it moves into the fan. So he aimed to create a duct to improve airflow, and he succeeded, even though it was quite loud. Cooling wise though, was actually impressive as well. The room temperature this time around was 20.2, and the average the ducted fan showed was 80.4, giving it a delta of 60.2. Now, in the grand scheme of things, between the fans we've already discussed, that's pretty good. Now, overall, versus every fan that's ever been on the show, not so good. But I'll give them props for going above and beyond, concluding a fan and a duct that worked together very well. Didn't have any interference issues when I printed it out. It hooked up well, fit into the fan. So you did your homework, you printed out, or you made a good product, and it worked how you liked it. Maybe if this had more blades, you'd get a little bit more performance. Now this last one, I actually hinted at it in the last video. This was a big undertaking, both in design from the designer and printing it and putting it together, but it worked. It worked surprisingly well. When I first saw it, I was like, I don't know how that's gonna turn out, but I liked it. This behemoth is called the Turbofan Compressor. And the idea here is that he wasn't just happy making one fan, he wanted to make a whole compressor assembly. Now let me take this apart so you can kind of see what's going on here. So the Turbofan Compressor, this is obviously the shroud. This was made by Ruben. And the only thing he really said about it is if the motor, talking about the fan, the A12X25, has enough power, he guarantees this will be first place. So that's a pretty bold statement. But right here you got the first piece of the puzzle, the shroud, and a little bit of advertising. It looks like datacrunch.io. I don't know what that is, but hey, go check it out maybe. I don't know. So far, there's not much to it. But you look at the shroud and you think, well, that's just a piece of plastic. There's not much to it. But you can see that there's some intent behind this. You got to step up from small to large. And then if you look on the inside, it's hard to notice, but if you take a clean look, you'll see that there's two lips on there. And those lips play a very important role. They help you seat the pieces correctly so they all fit together like he intended. So after the shroud, you have the first piece, and that's this guy. So this is essentially the last fan in the stack, and this one attaches to the motor, and you can see that the blade angle is really steep, and the print came out exceptionally well. I like the color. And then you're gonna notice, hey, there's threads on the top. What would those be for? Well, that's where it gets interesting. The next one is this stator. So the idea, you know how a stator and a compressor work? So that's what he's doing here. He's making an axial compressor. So the first fan, the one attached to the hub, then next up, you got this stator. After that, you have another fan. So this fan, as you can see, is also threaded, and this threads into the first fan that's on the hub. After that, you have another compressor that is similar to the first one, slightly larger, and sits above this fan. And then last but not least, you have the biggest fan of the bunch, the very last piece of the puzzle. And this one has the shallowest blade angle, and it's mounted at the very top. And this would be kind of like the high bypass fan of a jet engine, if you were to think of it kind of that way, although it spins at the same rate as like the high pressure section. So it's not exactly the same, but that's kind of what he's going for. A larger fan through a stator into smaller fans, slowly compressing air into the radiator. And the idea is to give a real high static pressure. And when I first seen this, I was like, whew, I hope he did his homework, because if not, that's gonna be a nightmare to assemble. But assembling it is really easy. I mean, essentially what I've done is I take the shroud and I mount it to the radiator. After that, I take the first fan, the one that goes to the hub, press that over the top onto the hub. Nothing really to it. Then comes up the smallest stator, the one that goes over top of that fan. Then you have the other fan, which simply just screws on to the one that's attached to the motor. Then you got another stator that goes above that one, and all those little lips help you guide that into place, so you make sure it's sitting flat and where it needs to be. And then the final piece is the big fan that goes right on top, and then the whole package is complete. And once it's together, it's literally a masterpiece. The time, so this wasn't a 30-minute design. There was some thought, some time, some effort placed in making this work. And he said that he was very lenient, or very open with his tolerancing. And I'm gonna say that it worked out great. Ruben, you did an exceptional job making something that went together very well. The press fits, the interference fits that you have in here are perfect. The threading was perfect. Everything goes together exceptionally well. The only iffy part of this whole deal is that being supported only on the hub, it has a tendency to want to droop in the front, and that gives you a little bit of rubbing. But with enough tweaking and kind of pushing it on and wiggling around, you can get it to be perfect. Ideally, you would like to have a shaft that went all the way through here with bearings on either side to make sure that it stays true to the center of rotation. But for what it is and how well he put it together, just on the execution, I would give you top honors for this one. And after you do finally get it to work together, it runs, which is even more surprising, because that's a lot of mass that this little motor has to spin around, and it does it. But the funny thing is that when you hook it up to like the sound test, so when I did the sound test, you spin it up and you'll notice something. It sounds very similar to that siren I made. It has a nice hum to it. Coming in with a sound output of 44.6, it wasn't the quietest, but it also wasn't the loudest, surprisingly. Now, it didn't spin very fast, so how well would something like this cool? Well, it wasn't superb. The room temperature this time around was 20.2. It had an average temperature of 83.8, so it didn't throttle, so that's a cool thing. But that gave it a delta of 63.6 and also put it in last place of this group. But I will say, if you look at the RPMs of all these fans, what drives the RPM is essentially the mass that the fan has to rotate. So this is a PWM fan, but I'm not using the PWM signal, so it by default spins as fast as it can. And with the other ones, you notice they're up and around the 2000 range, but this guy was only like around 700. And that's because there's a lot of fan to spin. And I think if I had this same configuration on a motor that had the ass to spin it, so say this was spinning at 2000 RPMs, I think he's right. I think that this would have done the best in this group, and maybe the best overall. Now, although it didn't do the best in this group, it still, again, is awesome. And I really appreciate the time, the effort spent putting this thing together. And I was glad to print it out, and I'm glad that it fit together so well. And A+, Ruben, A+. So that means when we look back at all these fans, number one for this group was the Ducted Fan, followed by the Trent, the Major Trent. After that is the golden ratio, and then up on the rear is the Turbofan compressor. But unfortunately, none of these guys were good enough to make the board. We haven't had anybody make the board in quite a while. Maybe next episode, but overall, these fans finished as followed. Ducted Fan, 10th place. Major Trent, 12th place. Golden Ratio, 13th place. Turbofan Compressor, 18th. So actually not even the worst so far. We've seen worse performing fans than this guy, even though we only managed to spin at about 700 RPM. So there you have it. Nobody made the board, unfortunately. I hope that the lighting's better. If you're getting sick of all the fan videos, I do apologize. I have some videos that are coming up that aren't fan videos for those out there that are like, yo, we need to calm down the fans. But if you like the fan content, make sure to let me know. If you like watching these Fan Showdown videos, make sure to get subscribed. Send me your ideas. You could, I mean, there's no telling where you could end up. You could end up making something that the whole world gets to use eventually, or you get to make something that just impresses at least me, and I'm sure a lot of you guys out there. So thank you guys for watching. Till next time, peace.